Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first week of our course, Propaganda and Protest. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and please join me in welcoming our speaker, Ben Weiss.
Thank you, Kristen, and good morning to everybody. I should first apologize. I am at the tail end of a very fast-running cold, so I might occasionally have to dodge to the side to attend to matters. But first, thanks to Kristen Hoskins for inviting me, and to Elizabeth Batty for helping make this lecture happen. This exhibition and the lecture came about by a long and complicated wandering path. Even before Leonard Lauder promised us his postcard collection back in 2009, we'd been talking to him about a project to do a book on propaganda postcards. We agreed to publish the book, but the book took a long time to get done. It had multiple authors and multiple changes of shape, and by the time it came out in 2017, that's a long time for a book, we realized that we had the makings of a really interesting exhibition. The book had never been intended to be a show, because at that point we didn't know we were getting the collection. But when the book came out, the exhibitions office said, "Why aren't you doing a show?" And the publications office said, "We always do better with the book when there's a show, so why aren't you doing a show?" And the director said, "Why aren't we doing a show?" So we did a show. But I'm very glad we did, because it was a way to take all of the research that had been done by a large team of people and pull it together into a public moment. The book and the show are different, and I encourage you to have a look at both of them. The book is more chronological, and the show is more more sort of a guide to how propaganda works. And together they actually tell a kind of an interwoven and interlaced story about what happened in the 20th century and how it happened. And I think they mate well. So to start, the question that sort of rises to mind first is, what is propaganda? It's not just political art, and political art is nothing new. So Kristen mentioned that I have a history with obelisks, so you'll be unsurprised, oops, get back there, to find an obelisk as my first slide. I worked on a project a number of years ago that was basically a history of the changing meanings of obelisks over the millennia. And so they do tend to show up in my work, but I think they provide a really good way. Obelisks are really good objects with which to think, because they change their meaning so much over time. They're religious objects, but they are also political objects. And this standing stone in Luxor, one stone, a monolith, imagine what it takes to carve and move one of those things, is a statement of political power. It's also a statement of divine power and how the two intertwine and come together. It's a statement about the role of the pharaoh and his power in the world. It's one kind of political art. A statement, I am here, I am powerful. And the words that run up and down the obelisk, the hieroglyphs, all basically say, I'm the pharaoh, I'm really powerful, I'm a really powerful guy, I'm the pharaoh, my name is. I'm not making this up. There's another kind of political art, though, and also in antiquity. It's the kind that celebrates a particular event. And this is a coin in our collection, the Eid Mar, which is the coin that Brutus had issued after the assassination of Caesar. It makes it very clear. On the Ides of March, get daggers and a freedom cap, saying that we have been freed from the tyrant. That's a political statement. It's a political statement in the form of a state issuing a statement about power, because this is an official state coin. But it's not about a timeless question. It's about, although it has survived 2,000 years, it's about a thing in the moment. That that's a piece of political art, and political art runs all the way down through the centuries. The thing about it, though, is it tends to be, as I say, somewhat topical. So this is a little fuzzy, but I hope you can see it. This is a piece of political art from 1838, published in the French journal The Caricature by an artist who is riffing on a complicated set of circumstances. And it's a kind of funny image, because here's a plinth with a big, well, can people see it? Can you see what that is? Yeah, it's a big pear on a very recognizable Parisian background, which is the Place de la Concorde. It's funny because it's absurd to see a pear that large, but to understand what's going on, you need to know a whole bunch of circumstances. You need to know that the spot where that pear sits is where the guillotine stood during the Reign of Terror. You need to know that the year before, the current French king had managed to extract an obelisk from Egypt and had it put up in that spot where it stands today. And you need to know that the current French king, Louis Philippe, had a particular physiognomy and was caricatured often as a pear. This is by an artist named Charles Philippon. These are sketches he made while in court. They landed him in jail. But the result is that every time you see a pear in French art of the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, it's usually a reference to Louis Philippe. So political art is full of in-jokes. It's full of things you got to know. And think about the political art you see today. It's always based around who was testifying to Congress last week, or what happened in the news cycle, or what person made a fool of themselves on a late-night show. There's things that are built into the culture that you have to know, and that you also have to be built inside a particular sort of discourse. In political art, it's about who has the power and who is sort of contrasting the power. And we have a lot of art like this in the collection. We have a lot of political cartoons. We have a lot of political caricatures. And we were talking about this once in the exhibition planning meeting. Because a lot of them are really wonderful. I mean, they're by great artists. They're by people like Daumier. We were thinking about an exhibition, and we were stymied by the fact that no one understands what's going on in these things. They require so many layers of unpeeling. And Malcolm Rogers, the previous director, said, well, we could call it "It Was Funny Once." But political art is not automatically propaganda. And I want to get at that difference through a sort of loop. Propaganda of the sort you'll see in the show, and of the sort that I'll be mostly talking about today, is something different. The definition's a little fuzzy, but I think the key to understanding the difference is inherent in the word itself, propaganda. It's also a relatively new phenomenon. Propaganda as a political tool is something that is really a 20th century phenomenon in a lot of ways, and I'll show you various ways why that's true. But the word itself is a 17th century word. And it comes, in our current use, from an organization within the Catholic Church, the Sacra Congregatio de Propaganda Fidei, the Sacred Congregation for the Propagation of the Faith, set up in the early 17th century. And here is their building in Rome, designed by, the name has changed, but here's the building that was built for them in the middle of the 17th century by both of the great Roman Baroque architects, Francesco Borromini and Gian Lorenzo Bernini, fighting it out, as they often did. The building is on Via di Propaganda, or Propaganda Street. It's always useful to translate fancy-sounding foreign place names and titles into English, because they turn out to be something very ordinary, like, Newdorp becomes Newtown, But this is their building. As I was saying, though, there's something important in the word itself, because propaganda is not a noun. It's the feminine ablative gerundive of propago, the verb which is about setting forward, extending, enlarging, spreading, increasing. What I mean is that the word has within it an active force. It's not a thing, it's not a propagation, it's propagating. And that, I think, actually is the key to a lot of what propaganda is about. Propaganda is on a mission. Propaganda wants to make friends with you. It wants to seduce you. It wants to convert you, in this case, literally. And it's willing to use all sorts of psychological tricks to do that. Propaganda isn't about reasoned argument and logical progression. It's about emotion. It's not about preaching to the choir. It's about getting you to join the choir. And in that, it's really a 20th century phenomenon. There are good historical reasons for that. Pardon me. One of the key ones is the changes that happened in Europe and the Americas in the 19th century. A period of massive urbanization, of massive industrialization, increased population, increased literacy, and the growth of mass media to feed all of those people who wanted to read and wanted to spend their time with newspapers and magazines and illustrated weeklies, and also an increase in the franchise. It's a slow and complicated and stuttering process across the 19th century, but in pretty much every country in Europe and in the Americas, and then also a little bit, to some degree, in Asia, more and more people, as the 19th century go on, are brought into the political process. They are, sometimes it's just men, sometimes it's just property-owning men, sometimes it's only property-owning men above a certain level, above a certain wealth level. But there's an increasing inclusion in the process of making decisions about the fate of the state and the nation that happens through the 19th century and into the 20th. That's a key piece of why things change in the way political art works. But there's another really big change, which happens after the turn of the 20th century, and that's World War I. Here are 3 recruiting posters from World War I. Well, 2 recruiting posters and 1 fundraising poster. This is the one on the right is the famous one for people from the States. I want you. This is James Montgomery flag. Caricatured, reused, taken again, put to all sorts of purposes ever since it was first released in 1917. But flag is picking up on a trend within World War I to basically break the fourth wall of the poster and address you. So in Italy, subscribe, meaning buy war bonds. And here is an anonymous soldier. So in the States, you get the mythical character Uncle Sam. In Italy, you get the somewhat anonymous soldier asking you to put money into the Italian credit bank to support the Italian war effort. And in Britain, you get Lord Kitchener. You are the man I want. Major war hero ends up dying. It is literally the inspiration for the poster by Flag. But World War I becomes a key moment in the development of propaganda because it's really the first total war that happens at a time that comes after this period of enormous industrialization, increased literacy, increased franchise, and it lasts a long time. It's a very expensive war. It's an expensive war in terms of money, to buy all the weapons, to feed all the troops. It's also an expensive war in terms of people, because all of the new weapons that are deployed during the war both cost a lot of money and kill a lot of people. So all of the countries that are engaged in this 4-year-long stalemate have to learn new ways of rallying their countries, have to learn new ways of bringing people into the war effort. And it's fascinating to watch the process from 1914 to 1918 as countries that started, for example, with all enlistment armies all free enlistment armies shift to a draft. How countries that start with a kind of 19th century, almost I'm not sure what the right word is. It's laissez-faire attitude to their militaries, turn them into massive state and centrally organized phenomena. They need to build machines for war. They also need to build the will for war, and they need to rally their countries around the war. And there's all of the combatant countries learn this skill in the 4 years. Some of them, like the United States, learned it a little more quickly as we came in later. Just to give you an example of some of the things that happened during World War I. Here are two German cards from the very beginning of the war. This is the one on the left is celebrating the fact that Austria, Hungary, and Germany are going to war together with united forces. We are going in under the banner of Germany here and Austria-Hungary here. This idea of a transnational movement to defend something, to defend the central powers, to defend the position of the Kaiser and the Emperor. But this idea that we will all rally together, that we will all become one in a single cause. Same thing happens in this card, which is simply titled German Storm Surge. And the idea that under the Pickelhaube, that's on the list of words, so this massive army of Central Powers troops will take the world, basically in the name of the Kaiser, in the name of the German monarchy, in the name of the Central European sort of basis of European civilization. They'll overrun France. They'll even, if you look up here, they'll make the little leap across the channel and come to England. There's lots of visual sophistication in propaganda of this era, and that's something which runs all the way through the 20th century. As people who are making images to convince you, to seduce you, are deploying all of the tricks they know and inventing new tricks to get you on their side. These are not, I should point out, these cards are not official state cards. These are cards that were issued sort of in a burst of war enthusiasm at the beginning of the war by private publishers, and I believe that the one on the left is actually issued by a cookie company. But marketing and propaganda are very closely allied. So you get positive things, you also get negative things. And here on the left is a Russian card from World War I and a French card from World War I, demonizing Kaiser Wilhelm. On the left because he has spread death and destruction throughout northern France and Belgium and literally set into flames the glories of French civilization. This is the cathedral at Reims, which was one of the sort of hot button issues in World War I. The Germans targeted cultural monuments in northern France. There's a whole series of cards about the Kaiser as the destroyer of European heritage, and on the right, simply sent by God, the envoy of God, as a bloody butcher. So you have on the German side, on the Allied side, you have the beginning of demonization. You also have quite this one kind of speckles out a little bit, but you have quite a bit subtler cards. Daddy, what did you do in the Great War? Forgot about that. This is a poster that was issued in 1916 as a recruiting poster for the British Army. It was so striking that in 1938, George Orwell cites and remembers it as a particularly kind of insidious, subtle, getting under your skin piece of propaganda. This business of the guilt that lies underneath, and the children who he suspects maybe actually later regret having inveigled their father off to war. But it's a very powerful image. And so during the course of World War I, all of these countries learn ways to rouse your ardor, to get under your skin, to get you to give money to support the war effort. And you can see that propaganda becomes something that people think about in a way they had never done before in a very simple statistical way. So Google Books, which has basically charged through pretty much the entire published world that lives in libraries. You can't always search the books yourself because many of them are in copyright, but they have this nifty statistical tool that you can use to look at the incidence of words that appear in published records. So this is the use of the word propaganda in books published in English between 1800 and 2008. I ran it for German, I ran it for Italian, I ran it for French, using the French and Italian and German words. It pretty much matches up. There's some cultural differences, but you can see a really striking curve here. And this is zeroed for each peak being 1 year. So it increases a little bit. People start thinking about it at the end of the 19th century. And then there is this enormous spike in World War I as people talk about the propaganda associated with the war. It falls off a little bit as the 20s, and then through the 20s and 30s and 40s, all the way up to a peak in the middle of, in World War II, propaganda, the issue of what it is and how it works and the fact that it's out there becomes something more and more and more and more and more present in the public discourse, in the books that people are reading, in the newspapers that people are reading, because the scanning process is indiscriminate. It isn't saying just books by academic authors, it's any book. Then after the war, it drops off a bit. This seems to correspond to the Cold War. And then this kind of is détente, and then finally the end of the century when people stop thinking about it as much. I think it's very telling, and I think it really does put in graphical form something that you can sense in the art, but you can't really pinpoint in the art. So mostly what we're going to talk about is the period between this peak and this peak. The period in the 20s and 30s, and that's really what the show is about as well. The book, as I said, is chronological and covers the period from roughly 1895 to the end of World War II. For various reasons, including quite literally the shape of the spaces in which we installed the show, a chronological method didn't really work for the show. If you walk in Ritz and Brown, you'll find that it has like 7 entrances, and people come in from all sorts of different directions. So you can't tell a simple chronological story in that space. And so that led us to do this more theoretical and sort of slightly higher level approach. And that's what this talk reflects as well. So having isolated that as our time period, let's talk a little bit about the messages. A lot of them have their sources or have their origins in the sorts of things that the state powers, the state propaganda offices, the state information offices learned in World War I. One of the key things that you discover very quickly is that this is a period that's obsessed with leaders. And we have a whole wall dedicated to leaders in the show. And if you start to compare these images, so here's Mussolini, who comes to power in the early 20s in Italy. He's the first of the fascist leaders in Europe. He, in many ways, sets the tone for European, particularly right-wing propaganda throughout the 20s, 30s, and into the 40s. This is a classic Mussolini pose. Staring into the future or staring into the distance, brave with the brewing storm, steering safely the ship of state. One of Mussolini's themes is that he's the vigorous one. And there's all sorts of propaganda about Mussolini as a sailor, as a skier, as a pilot, as a violin player, as a little bit as a lover. The sort of the quintessential virile man. Several people have said, sounds a little bit like Putin. And I don't think that's entirely an accident. But you'll notice he's seen from below, and we're in safe and capable hands. So that's a right-wing state. Here's a left-wing state. This is a Soviet design that was actually then used on an American postcard. But communism aspired to be international. A lot of these movements aspired to be international. But here is Lenin literally directing the revolution. But again, the same pose, staring out of the frame into the distance, into something that he can see, that he will lead you to, that you maybe can't see. On the other side, Hitler. Different historical mode that he's using. Here he's pretending to be sort of a medieval banner carrier, but basically the same thing going on. Looking into the distance, leading the state forward. This sense that, again, that you are below him. So we have two right-wing states and a left-wing state, but lest you think that this is something which is limited only to authoritarians, we do the same thing. This is MacArthur in World War II. It's a little different effect. There's a little bit more come with me, join, there's a little bit more enlistment to it, but the basic visual effect is the same thing. And you find this less than with authoritarian states, but you do find it in so-called democratic, small d democratic countries as well. The idea that there's going to be one person who will take you forward. History is really important in this period. And the idea that your rule, that your power is somehow sanctioned by history is really important, particularly to people who have come to power recently, or who have a sense that they might be a little bit illegitimate. So here are three, again. On the left is Francisco Franco, the fascist dictator in Spain. I think it can be very hard to pin down exactly when propaganda was made, because it tries to be a little timeless. It tries not to be so topical in many cases. But this seems to be after the Civil War is over. But what's he doing? He's dressing himself up effectively as the inheritor of the legacy of the Spanish Reconquista, the Christian movement to take Spain back from the Muslims. And that's very much how he positioned himself in Spanish society. I am the inheritor. I'm not royal. I'm not legitimate in that sense, but I am the inheritor of the spirit of medieval and Renaissance Spain, of bringing back the Catholic kingdom. Here, a different kind of historical legitimacy, one that's much closer to in time. This is Stalin, who is the inheritor, as he wants to make it very, very clear, the inheritor of Lenin's position. I mean, you couldn't get more overlapped. There was a power struggle, and it was very important that Stalin demonstrate that he was going to take the Soviet state forward in the same way. Sort of, you can almost feel Lenin, who did not like Stalin, kind of like wanting to nudge him out of the way. And then a more subtle one. This is soon after, probably 34, 33, 34. Soon after Hitler comes to power, soon after he becomes chancellor. Again, in a highly contested, highly fragile and fractious moment in German politics, he is stating, he's shaking hands, literally, with Otto von Bismarck, the leader who, though not the king, not the emperor, had basically led the unification of Germany in the 1870s. Germany had been a large set of disparate and independent states, and under Prussian domination, led by Bismarck in the 60s and 70s, Bismarck pulled it together as a single nation state effectively for the first time. So these two are meeting as equals. You are my inheritor, and above them, in a sort of ghostly 18th century presence, is Frederick the Great of Prussia, who is the first to sort of lead Prussia towards a German sort of a domination of the German sort of region. So there's a lot of history being wrapped up in this card. It's history that pretty much any German would know in the 30s. Oh yes, everyone knows about Bismarck because that's just basically the last generation, and everybody knows about Frederick the Great. It's a neatly tied up and bundled moment. Pardon me. So you have leaders, but not everyone can be a leader. Or maybe everyone can be a leader. It just depends on what kind of leader you want to be. In the show, you'll find a case that is full of little postcards that stand up. When we were designing it and installing it, we started calling it the hedgehog, because it's a triangular case in which all of these cards stand up on what are basically little open-faced postcard sandwiches, where there's a piece of plexiglass and a postcard attached to it with photo corners. Every one of those cards, if you look at the case, is a card of a single figure. And it's a card about heroes. It's a card about it's an army of postcard heroes. And that is a really big theme in the 20s and 30s, no matter what the culture. So just quickly, the idea of soldiers charging into or overcoming obstacles. This is the Spanish Civil War card, strong men to the front, a right-wing card. Here's an Italian card from the 30s during the invasions of North Africa and Ethiopia. The advance will continue. We will go forward. Even as our soldiers fall, we will go forward. And in the States, this is from a set of paintings done by N.C. Wyeth, father of Andrew, in 1921-22 for a commemorative volume of patriotic poems, pretty much all about the Revolution and the Civil War. But it's a slightly different image. The gun is down, not up. But the idea of the yeoman farmer who has grabbed his musket and has come out to defend American liberty. It's a very similar idea of the projection of the state, or the projection of patriotic fervor into a person. Incidentally, you can see these if you're up in Maine. These paintings are owned. It's a very, very interesting series. They're owned by a private school in Pennsylvania, but they're on view at the Farnsworth Art Museum in Rockland for a few more weeks, I think. And it's quite a well done show with the paintings, with the book, the poems, the question of how the Wyeth at the very beginning of his career is framing American stories. So into battle, but also defending the state. There's lots and lots of sentinels they're not engaged in battle, but they are on guard for you. This is a Soviet card celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Soviet Navy. This is effectively a New Year's card from the middle of World War II. You are protected. And then the Japanese card during the 30s period, just before the war begins. Across cultures, across types of regime, the same patterns over and over again. And I debated whether I had too many slides here, so I don't really have much to say, except, again, Italian, and Spanish, this is a right-wing card, celebrating the victory that you will feel as a member of this army of people come together. There is one key thing, though. These are not just accidental images. And I think they're very carefully crafted images. And I think that's summed up best by this trio of cards, all of which are designed by a pretty significant figure in the history of poster art named Ludwig Holbein. Before World War I, Holbein was working in Berlin and also in other cities in Germany, selling things. He was selling coats, he was selling coffee, he was selling automobiles. He helped define a new style of poster and a sort of new, more abstracted style of posters that kind of changed the way posters were done in Central Europe and elsewhere. He was always conservative. After the war, after World War I, when Germany had been defeated, and there was an enormous amount of discontent about how the peace had been achieved, the sense that Germany had been cheated, that Germany had been treated badly. There's an upswelling of right-wing militias and right-wing groups of right-wing ex-soldiers who want to basically repair what they saw as the stab in the back that was the end of World War I. Holbein, who was conservative before the war, becomes a real right-winger and starts doing propaganda for essentially the groups that are the precursors of the Nazis. So This is for a group called the Stahlhelm, the steel helmets. You can see the origins of a lot of Nazi art in this. The set jaw, the martial bearing, the rigid posture, the idea of a person who is embodying almost a stone, a stone sculpture in a funny way. But this is the key one to me, because it basically just says, and you? It's inviting you to come in. And what are you going to do about this? Will you join us? None of these people has eyes you can see. And if you look back at the other cards, you'll notice that these are not individualized people. If you go back to the slide of the leaders, you know those guys instantly. Even 70, 80 years later, you can recognize Lenin. You can recognize Hitler. You can recognize, maybe a little bit less, Mussolini. But if you're Italian, you really can. These guys, their eyes are shaded. They don't have identifiable features. You're not supposed to be seeing them as someone else. You're supposed to be seeing them as you. That's a key piece of propaganda in this period, that it's something that you can project yourself into. And sometimes it's in the thrill of victory, and sometimes it's in the person who stands stolidly defending the state, and sometimes it's the person who sacrifices himself. So on the left, an Italian card, we will return. And it's almost impossible to think of this sort of ghostly figure as anything other than the spirit of one of these fallen soldiers rising up. And you can say that's something that you would sacrifice yourself to national glory. But this is one of those N.C. Wyeth paintings, again from 1922, and this World War I soldier who is clearly rising up out of the carnage, or the aftermath of the carnage, and joining the pantheon of great historical warriors. You can see a Roman centurion and a medieval crusader. That there's something bigger that you should sacrifice yourself to. That's a big piece of that. So you have to create people that people want to become, and then you have to give them something that they want to join. That's the next group. I'm just mindful of the time. I think I'm in good shape. I'll pick it up a little bit, but because I have a long way to go. It's a big topic. All through this period and all through these cards, there are all sorts of basically enticements for you to sign up, to join the movement. And one of the patterns that you find visually, these are often people who have trained in advertising, for example. So this is the Opera Balilla is essentially a sort of a fascist communal movement, and you get a tremendous sense of dynamism out of these guys who are marching, stamping. And if you watch videos of Mussolini rallies, people march in not a goose step, but kind of a stomping as they go on parade, meant to convey energy. Here, rushing into battle in the Spanish Civil War, a new dawn rises, and this one, which I think is the most, again, the Germans are very good at this. The Nazis are very good at this. This very pretty subtle card from 1931, Hail Struggle, 1931. Come to the rally, and so he's yelling out. But of course, all of these Nazi flags are held by people. So he's the leader of the group. But you get the sort of implied sense of this army of followers. Come to the rally, come to the struggle. And rallies are really important in every society in the period, that is, every authoritarian society in the period. It's not just it's not just enticing people to come, but it's showing people that they happen. This is a new acquisition. It's in the show, a photograph by Alexander Rodchenko, taken from above Red Square. And so this is Lenin's tomb. And the Red Square throughout the Soviet period is a place where there's public displays of patriotism, there's public displays of the unity of the state in the form of the workers or the army or the Navy or the Air Force. But if you look closely, you can see that this is a photograph, this is a propaganda photograph of propaganda in action. So these are all placards that people are holding in the rally. So they're going to march out in a long line, each one of them holding whatever it is they're supporting. Given the date of the photograph, it's probably they're probably in sort of encouraging people to meet a 5-year plan. This idea of industrializing, doing 5 years worth of industrialization in 4 years is a big thing in the late 20s. I don't know yet, but the photograph is detailed enough that if we get it under the microscope, we probably can read the signs, and that'll be an interesting piece for when the show comes down. So big rallies, but also inserting people into smaller situations and documenting those smaller situations. This is a card which it's sort of silly, even if it's a little creepy at the same time. Mussolini is il duce, the leader. The Latin for duce is dux, leader. This is a card that was issued in 1934, year 12 of the fascist regime, because Mussolini had a big enough ego that he actually restarted the calendar when he came to power. It's all about branding the state. And this is a date that was a fascist holiday celebrating the founding of the ancient city of Rome. But if you look really closely, you can see that this isn't just like patterns on the ground. These are tables. This is a big dinner party, or maybe a lunch party, and lined up around this array that says dukes are people having lunch. They are literally inside the propaganda. Mussolini does this sort of thing all the time. The Italian fascist apparatus is extremely creative and extremely complicated, and people learn all sorts of lessons from it. All the other states, pick up things, because Mussolini started life as a journalist, and he knew about marketing, and he knew about how to create a captivating image. It's not that he himself was stage directing this, but it's not out of the question. So this idea that you're going to join something, and states use all sorts of different methods of creating that sense that there's something that you want to be part of. The rally where you want to be in the crowd, the dinner party, the lunch party that you might want to be part of, a sense of energy. This is a series of cards by a Latvian Soviet artist, Gustavs Klucis, who is very important in Soviet propaganda in the 20s and the mid-30s, and then he falls from favor and is killed by Stalin. This is when he's still in favor in 1927-28, and he's taking avant-garde styles, photo montage, the idea of clipping out pictures and pasting them together in new ways, which was an up-to-date style in the 20s, to make a really wonderful series of cards that celebrate the Spartacadia, which was meant to be a kind of socialist alternative to the Olympics. It was a kind of non-aligned Olympics that happened once in 1928. But he's showing the energy of youth, the energy of the new international movement, using the visual language of the time, of an up-to-date visual language. The left-wing version of that, but there's also right-wing versions of that. So here, from a few years later, are one of a large group of cards that celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Italian Air Force. And here, it's not the sort of international photo montage style specifically. It's this idea of dynamic, futurist Italian art with swirls and facets that Mussolini and the Italian Air Force are picking up to capture the dynamism of the new technology, the new military technology that will take Italy from being old and moribund and sort of out of date to a power worthy of its ancient ancestors. So the idea of ancient ancestors is really important for Italy, but the idea of being a dynamic, new, modern successor to antiquity is really important as well. And you get these things wrapping up in each other. So new things, old things, but if you're rallying to something, you have to figure out what it is that you are rallying for. And here's where all of the different states work differently. In Germany, one of the things that you're rallying for is an idea of racial purity. So these are 4 cards, which are also posters. The one at the bottom left is designed by the same fellow I mentioned earlier, Ludwig Holbein. The others are by other people working in a kind of Holbeinian Nazi style. The top 2 are cards encouraging parents, effectively, to enlist their kids in the Hitler Youth. And the bottom 2 are those, more or less, those same kids 10 years later joining student movements. It's important, though, that you pay attention to the racial type. I'm delicately putting this. This is not what all Germans look like. But it's what the Nazis want all Germans to look like, and you're supposed to rally towards that. You're supposed to feel good if you do look like that, and maybe not so good if you don't. Or please get out of the country. So there has to be, and this is sort of a pivot for propaganda, because if you're going to have the good things, you also have to have the bad things. And that's how we've actually divided the show in that first room. There's us on one side and there's them on the other. And there's all sorts of ways of making them. You can make the people that you're supposed to hate silly. These are Nazi cards from the beginning of World War II that show the British as completely out of their depth. They are stuck in old ways of thinking. They're stuck in old ways of thinking about the military. They're convinced that the invasion is going to come by sea, whereas in fact it's going to come by air. They're dressed up in silly old clothes and a little kind of dumb admiral's hat on this one. On this card, the only anti-Semitic caricature I included in the show, for reasons we can talk about maybe in the question and answer period, they're still relying on their navy as the warplanes come in, but they're also distracted because they're under the thumb of Jewish bankers, and they're not paying attention to the true needs of their state. As I said, we'll talk about that later maybe. But so make them look silly, make them look evil or grotesque. Here's 2 Soviet cards from the beginning of the early to mid-20s by an artist named Victor Denny, who creates caricatures. He creates caricatures of the church as a spider, pulling people into the web where presumably they will be consumed, or the capitalist sitting in the middle of his web, grotesque, a non-person. The idea that there are forces out there that are conspiring against not just you individually, but a whole nation or a whole type of people are very important. Denny is a really interesting and important figure because he starts making his caricatures shortly after the October Revolution in 1917. And his style, he just keeps going. His style doesn't really change all the way through the 20s, 30s, into the 40s. It's a key axiom of propaganda that you find something that works and you repeat it and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, and I'll shut up now. That's one of the things that the Soviets learn. Denny's caricatures become fixed in people's heads. You also have to turn reality on its head sometimes with your enemies. So this is a group of cards from the Spanish Civil War. This guy's Franco. Remember the conquistador from early on, astride his horse, leading Spain to medieval glory? Well, these cards celebrate a union of the 2 major mostly left-wing trades unions that have come together during the Civil War and will lead essentially the non-fascists to victory over Franco. He's a pipsqueak. He's meaningless. He's insignificant. He's like a little thing we bang on the anvil, or we can pluck him out with a pair of pliers. Of course, this is completely not the reality of the situation. At this point, Franco's winning quite handily. The battles are long and they're bloody, but slowly the fascists are succeeding. This is a piece of essentially false news. And it's a rallying cry. Come with us. Doesn't work. And the other important way you do it is you just simply dehumanize people. And I'll run through these fairly quickly. But early Soviet cards where the people you're trying to rally against, in this case peasants or kulaks or sort of leftover white Russians and capitalists, are literally silhouettes. You don't have to worry about them. We'll just get them out of the way. Or in the States, during World War II, a sense that if you create a cartoon situation, you maybe separate people from the pain of violence a little bit. I mean, there's deep racism in the war in the Pacific, but there's also a sense that you have to create a space where people are comfortable with violence. So, bundles for Hirohito. Who's this cute guy with a bomb? Or the idea that the plane goes down like in a video game. There's no human cost. Or just a little something to remember Pearl Harbor. The stories about Pearl Harbor that were told in the American press about the people who died horrible, slow deaths or sudden deaths in American ships are all over the news. There's all sorts of quite horrifying accounts of what happens in the Arizona, for example. But that's happening over there. We don't have to think about that. That sort of thing isn't happening to them. Got to keep people apart, or you just make people into abstractions. There's a lot of taking people and turning them into things. In this case, 3 maps of England, and now finish up England just with a big fist, and we'll take. And it's no muss, no fuss, no blood, no ruins. You save that sort of question for things where you are trying to get your own people rallied up about the perfidy and the evil of your enemies. So it's one thing to show big fists stabbing and crushing and dropping bombs on your enemies. It's entirely another if you're maybe on the losing side and you're trying to rally people against the inevitable occupiers. These are Italian cards from after it's clear that Italy is out of it. And emphasizing the destruction, emphasizing the ruin of Italian cities with these 2 Western desperados, or Roosevelt as a shining, happy figure as he's always seen. Just a smile confirms my virtue, which is an Italian toothpaste advertisement from the 30s. But you'll notice that's very careful. This is a civilian target. This is a Red Cross church, and we're just bombing away. These are cards that are meant essentially to spoil the peace rather than win the war. They know that they're not going to win, and now they have to basically their goal is to keep people unhappy with the inevitable occupation. I think I'll skip this one, but happy to go back to it. All of that seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? I think if you're living in a society and you are getting all of these images, you probably can tell when you're being told, when you're being shown a caricature, when you're being shown a piece of false sort of, or at least slightly twisted information. It's very easy to look back at propaganda of this period, or of any period, and think, well, I mean, everybody knew what was going on. Everybody knew this stuff. But it's important to remember that even the most egregious pieces of propaganda, even things like that photo or like that card of Roosevelt with the shining teeth, all of that is distributed, even in wartime, against a backdrop of everyday life. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, crying babies, irrational bosses, bad weather, beautiful sunsets, a night at the movies. All of this stuff is sort of woven into a life that is not inherently or completely political. And that is the other piece of propaganda. You have the messages, but you also have to have very clever ways of inserting it into daily life so that you don't necessarily think of it as propaganda. And the other thing that we tend to forget is that periods have styles. So you may wonder why I'm showing you this picture of what looks like a California house of the 1950s. This was a brilliant experiment they did out in Los Angeles in 2014 at one of the Richard Neutra houses, famous modernist architect, German-born, worked in LA, builds these gorgeous mid-century modern houses up in the Hollywood Hills and throughout sort of greater Los Angeles. There's a museum, it's a characteristically American style, we think of it. There's a museum in Los Angeles called the Wende Museum, which is dedicated to the Cold War and the aftermath of the Cold War in Eastern Europe. And they did a little experiment. This is a Neutra house, but they've taken out all the furniture and they've replaced it with Eastern German furniture from the 50s and 60s. And part of the test was, can you tell the difference? And honestly, unless you're a scholar of this material, you really can't. There's on either side of the Iron Curtain, the same design styles, even if they have slightly different inflection, are happening in the 50s and 60s. People are copying each other, people are imitating each other. And the same thing is true in the 20s and 30s and 40s. So we think, well, we can tell Nazi propaganda pretty easily, and I'm sure people in Germany probably could too. Maybe? So here's a quick test. Which one is the Los Angeles 1932 Olympics, and which one is the 1936 Berlin Olympics? I have someone nominating LA for below. Do we have a vote? LA. LA below? Yes. Anybody for Berlin below? A couple of hands. Okay, good. LA is below. This is Berlin 1936. This is LA 1932, but they're both kind of in the same style. Here are two eagles. Which one is on the Fisher building in Detroit, of the Fisher Auto Body Company, and which one is at Tempelhof Airport in Berlin? Fisher on the left. Fisher on the left. Okay, you're doing much better than my test audience. Yes, Fisher on the left, and the Nazi airport on the right. But you can see, up to now, everyone's gotten it wrong, by the way. Two more. Two central banks. Which one is the Federal Reserve and which one is the Reichs Ministry for Finance? Left is the US. Very good. Excellent. So you guys won't be tricked by propaganda. This isn't propaganda. This is just a style of the time. And the last one, school children pledging their allegiance and their faith to their country. I hear right for American. No. Right's Germany. Left's America. This is something called the Bellamy salute, which was very fashionable in the 20s, 30s, a way of basically giving a physical action to the Pledge of Allegiance. With you can see there's a slight difference. Your palm is turned this way rather than that way. So a mass rally full of raised arms isn't quite as alien, though it is pretty alien. But just to sort of get a sense that these are things in the culture, and one of the things that propagandists do and need to do is to make their messages blend in to the world. So the first foreign leader to do a talking film is Mussolini. And it's in 1927. It's just a little short done by Fox Movietone News that's part of a great big sort of super evening bill that is done in Midtown Manhattan. There's a film by F.W. Murnau. There's a kind of sound and light show that involves films of the Vatican Choir. And see and hear His Excellency Benito Mussolini. He addresses the audience in English. He talks about how important Italians are to America, how much friendship there is between the two countries, how Italians are making America great. Mussolini was incredibly aware of and sensitive to, as I said earlier, sensitive to modern technologies and their importance. He said that if he could give a speech to 20 towns in Italy once a week, i.e. by radio or possibly by television, he wouldn't need any other ways of staying in power. He understood the power of the media. So it's one thing. He's a journalist. He starts with a media savvy. But even people we don't think of as being terribly media savvy, I mean, are working in a modern context. So the Hollywood caricature. How many of you have ever seen the movie Ninotchka? Okay, I highly recommend this movie. It's an Ernst Lubitsch film from 1939 or 1940 about three Soviet apparatchiks who come to Paris and kind of fall in love with the city, and Greta Garbo shows up as their minder. And Greta Garbo plays in the first half of that movie. She plays everyone's vision of the Soviet Union in the 30s. Dour, unfashionable, unsavvy. And the whole movie is about how she changes. That's not a fair reading, because in the 20s and the 30s, the Soviets had an incredibly sophisticated and up-to-date sense of what worked in the world to bring people into, to help achieve the world's socialist revolution. One example. In 1927, if you were in Germany, you could get a very up-to-date history of the Russian Revolution. This is issued by a German publishing house that is very closely allied with with sort of Soviet information sort of control, as it were. It has an up-to-date photo montage cover by John Hertfield. It comes out in weekly issues. So you can pick it up at the newsstand while you're also getting your daily paper or your weekly illustrated magazine. There are 20 issues. If you're really interested in the magazine, you can get a little binder for it. And if you liked it a lot, it's issued in tens and tens and tens of thousands of copies. This isn't a rare thing. It's completely within the structure, the distribution structure of standard German commercial newspaper printing of the 1920s. And if you liked it, they also will send you a prospectus for the next one, which is about the civil wars that happen after the Russian Revolution, and a sort of sign-up sheet so you can get your friends to subscribe as well. All of this looks exactly like every other serial publication in 1920s Germany. It's, whether you're subscribing to the Celebrity News or the Model Railroad Club. They've woven communist propaganda into a capitalist model. And that's important to think about as you think about how propaganda works into the world. So we think, turning to two case studies, and then I'll go to questions. Both of them are about the Nazis. So there's a lot of Nazis in this talk, and I apologize for that. If you kind of Google up Nazi propaganda, you get something like this. You get German soldiers pretending to be Roman centurions marching, marching towards a rally or from a rally. You get clips from Leni Riefenstahl movies. You get the Hollywood quick version of Nazism. Very obvious that something's going on. I mean, these, the swastika, the thing that looks like a Roman imperial army, sort of army trophy, the uniforms. But it's important to remember just how important propaganda and modern propaganda was in the 30s in the Nazi movement. They were obsessed with it. One of Hitler's very first followers was Joseph Goebbels. As early as 1920, basically at the moment of the formation of the movement. One of the very first acts the Nazis do after coming to power is to create a ministry for propaganda and public enlightenment within a month of coming to power. And there is a carefully planned, systematic penetration of society with all sorts of information about, and sort of a sense that you are embedded in an inevitable culture, an inevitable world where you cease to think in terms of political differences. So one of the things they specialize in, for example, is dressing up cities. This on the left is a photograph of, we think, Saarbrücken, which is part of the Saar, a part of Germany that was taken away after World War I and then put back in 36 to celebrate the reunification of the Saar with the rest of Germany in 36. You get, banners and banners. You're literally living in a theater set. That's a celebration of an event, but it happens all the time. You go, visitors to Berlin and to Munich in the 20s, and rather in the 30s, talk about the omnipresence of banners. Always, you don't really get the full effect in black and white photos. These big streaks of red all over town. Photographs that then get repurposed and then distributed, for example, as kind of old postcards with a slightly more kind of modern photographic touch, or if you have slightly more conservative tastes, like an old woodcut. This is the Nazi movement is about bringing back German glory. So one people, one empire, and this sense of castles on the hill, old-fashioned town, and Nazi banners. It's sort of always present. It's present in large forms. It's present in small forms, on your coins, or on church bells. You may have seen a story in the Times about a month ago about a town, Hexheim, that has discovered that they had a swastika on their bell in their church tower, and it's caused a great deal of ruckus about what to do. Should it be left as a historical monument? Is it something that must be expunged? It's very similar questions that we've been having about Civil War monuments in the States. Different outcomes, but a debate that happens today. You get it in the strangest places. You get it on children's film magazines. This is a film, the Film Courier, but you have two kids in one of the older and the younger version of those cards you saw earlier, but with always under the nationalist banner. You get ordinary images like this one, which is just a kind of almost a mugshot after the Munich Accords in 1938, where you have the prime ministers of England and France and the Chancellor of Germany and the Prime Minister, or Mussolini, basically after they've signed the agreement that will allow Germany to annex Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia in 1938. This is one of the key moments in the 30s. This pretty standard news photograph gets just modified enough to turn it into a piece of propaganda. So if you get the order has shifted. So here and here are now here and here, and these guys have moved to the middle and just a little bit higher, and the sort of the rays of the glorious future are coming out of the building where the accord was signed. It's about the success of Germany and Italy in a very subtle way, because this isn't objectively a political statement. And on the back, if you're attentive to even, this is a fairly ordinary text on the postcard, but on the back you get even a special, you get a carefully crafted postmark. So you get the swastika, but you also get Munich, Hauptstadt der Bewegung, capital of the movement. Not the capital of Germany, the capital of the Nazi movement. So you're constantly getting reminders everywhere of what they want you to think in ways that are not necessarily strictly political, like these rather striking and terrifying photos of Hitler giving a speech with the gestures and the clenched hands and the sort of if you can't go to a Hitler rally, you can get postcards of a Hitler rally and sort of sense what they're like. These are all quotes from Mein Kampf, carefully designed to look as much like movie stars cards of the same period as possible. So 3 Hollywood stars, Marlene Dietrich, Greta Garbo, and Shirley Temple, issued in German postcards of the same period. One kind of celebrity, another kind of celebrity. Is there really any difference? It's all famous people. And if you're really, really, really good at it, you can get other people to do your propaganda for you. So these are from a campaign for Guinness that never happened. But in 1936, or late 35, Guinness is looking to break into the German market. They send out to their artists to come up with some advertisements to sort of sell stout in Germany, and they come back with the standard Guinness Pelican flying over the Berlin Olympic Stadium, complete with swastikas. Now, the artist who did this is not a Nazi. The artist who did this is just is the Guinness in-house artist, Gilroy, or advertising agency that Guinness uses. And then, well, they're also celebrating the 50th anniversary of Mercedes and maybe some German cars, maybe the Führerwagen, complete with. Guinness isn't trying to sell National Socialism. Guinness is trying to sell beer. But they've decided that the way to do this is maybe to sort of blend in with the leaves. They don't do it in the end. This campaign never happened. But such is the power of propaganda. And now I'm going to wrap it up. I've got just one last little quick cautionary story. Is made manifest by what happened between 1931 and 1938. You remember I talked about the Versailles Treaty and the idea that Germany had been betrayed, that the treaty had been unfair, that Germany was suffering too much from the terms of the peace that came after World War I. The moment Hitler comes to power, he starts banging that drum as a state policy, not just as a party policy. And throughout the 1930s, the theme of Germany in chains, over and over and over again. So something that had been a right-wing meme turns into a national policy over the 30s. The idea that Germany needs to rip up Versailles, needs to rip up the treaty, needs to free itself from the snake, to break the shackles. They start on a very systematic campaign of convincing the rest of the world that that's the case. So, poor us, poor victims. 2 cards. The top one you'll notice is in German, the bottom one in English, that try to make the point graphically. This is poor Germany, we have no guns. Look at all of these people around us with guns. Is this fair? Germany's disarmament and the armament of her neighbors. We're not looking to take over the world. We just want to be able to defend ourselves. So you'll notice, as I say, in German and in English, but the card is clearly produced in Germany, despite this is the back of the English version. It gives a little story about what's going on the front. But this particular way of arranging the back of a postcard and this font are German fonts. So this is a piece of propaganda for outside consumption. You also take your case to the people, maybe not your own people. These are two cards from the top one from 1935 and the top and bottom one from 1939 in the States. Germany wants peace. This is a rally in Brooklyn for the German-American Bund, which is a non-official affiliate of the Nazi Party. The idea that the United States, which is always on the fence about things, well, maybe we can convince them to take our side. And this one, I encourage you to go in the show and look at the other card of this. This is a giant rally that the Bund did in February 1939, on the theory of the free American. That says George Washington in the middle, in Madison Square Garden. 20,000 people show up. There's a card in the show that looks not entirely dissimilar to, say, the card celebrating the Anschluss, the takeover of Austria. But the message of this rally was meant to be that Germany, right-wing Germany is in the United States, that right-wing Germany wants peace, that we are one. They take the message further. So one of the key things that really stuck in the crawl after the war was, so I should have actually done this card, this photo, this one twice. This one on the right shows Germany and Poland, and a sort of isolated bit of East Germany called East Prussia. Poland didn't exist before World War I. It had been wiped from the map 100 years earlier. But it was reconstituted after World War I, and because it needed a way to get to the water, they created a corridor for Poland to get to the Baltic Sea. And they took the city of Danzig, now Gdansk, and turned it into an international city, governed by no country. This was unacceptable from the beginning to not just the right wing in Germany, but so what did they do? Well, how would you feel? You know, if Canada needed a path to the sea and Boston were the international city. We don't know where this card came from. We don't know where, it looks like it was printed in Germany, but it might not have been. We just aren't sure. But they bang this theme over and over and over again, and the Munich Accords happen, and, you know, it works. In March 1938, they changed the situation in East Prussia. They changed the situation in Czechoslovakia. They changed the situation in Austria, all without firing a shot. And in attention to details, this is the back of that card. Austria, Germany, United, special postmark. Everything, think about everything, all the details. So that's a kind of downer to end the talk. But the point I wanted to make was really about the ways that propaganda frames issues, but then also the ways that it works, the ways that it gets into your head. And that ultimately is, those two pieces are essential for effectiveness. Just doing caricatures of people doesn't turn a population against someone. You need to be able to sort of push it constantly until they kind of lose their bearings. And that's what, in this case, particularly Nazi Germany was very good at. So we have about 10 minutes, and are there questions or comments, or does anyone want to throw something at me? So, ma'am, in the fourth row. So, yes, yeah. Yes, you. Yeah.
So I have one very specific question, because you're so knowledgeable that it's fun to be able to ask you this is something I hadn't even given. When you're doing the leader section, there were two pictures of leaders outside, and one had crows, a lot of crows, and one had doves, and I was just wondering what the significance
Of the.
of that was.
It's this card.
I mean, this was wonderful, that's so specific.
sorry, go back to slideshow. Is it this card here?
No, yes, that's the one with the doves, and then to the left, and then before that, there was one with the crows.
This is the Franco card about bringing essentially civilization back to Spain. I don't know what the specific meaning of the doves is. It might be a Eucharistic dove. It might be a dove of peace. It might be just a decoration for the sky. This is a German eagle, though. This is about the German Empire. This is a symbol of these three German leaders and the symbol of the state. So.
Right, but contrasting that with the one before, in the slide before that had crows, or maybe it was just before that one. But anyway, it was just strikingly different. Maybe I'm making that up.
Oh, anyway, I'll dig it up.
Thank you.
Sir. Sir. Yeah.
What part did the free press play in exposing the propaganda, both in the Soviet Union and in Germany?
The question is about what role the free press played in exposing propaganda in the Soviet Union and in Germany. I think the simple answer is almost none, in the sense that there really wasn't a free press in the Soviet Union starting as soon as 1920, the early 20s, basically. So one of the key pieces of Soviet propaganda is to control the means of the dissemination of information. You see that in totalitarian states even today. For example, there are all sorts of internet controls in Turkey and in China now that keep people from doing certain sorts of searches in Google or ban Google entirely. In Germany, it's a slightly different story because in the 20s, of course, there's a very raucous free press in Germany. And the question of what people are trying to sell, what stories are trying to be sold by the left wing and the right wing and the center is vigorously debated throughout the 20s. What the Nazis do in 31 or 32 is immediately clamp down on the ability to report things and to criticize things. The trick is that the German language press is not always German. So there is a vigorous debate that happens first in Austria during the mid-30s about things that are going on in Germany, written in German. There's a vigorous debate in the German language press in Czechoslovakia, where there's a lot of Germans, including refugees from Nazi Germany, including my grandparents. And in Switzerland. So the situation in the German-speaking world is a little more nuanced, but eventually it gets shut down systematically. So,
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. Could you please take us back briefly to the image that you said you might return to? I think you skipped
yes.
the mother and child, maybe?
Yeah.
Just before that, interior furniture.
There it is. Yeah, there it is.
Thank you.
I only skipped over this because time. I was getting conscious of time. It's actually one. If I were changing things around, I might do this one instead of the other. This is an interactive card. This is another card from late in World War II in Italy, after it's clear that the Italian governments, first the Mussolini government and then the replacement fascist government, are not going to succeed. And it's meant to literally reveal itself because you unfold it. So the first, you open it up and here's this pretty springtime scene. It's Easter, it's springtime, and Mama and her little boy are going into town, going happily through the fields into town, having done the market. At home, Papa is waiting anxiously for them while he's listening to Radio London. So the implication is that he is listening to the radio for what's the word I'm looking for? Non-official government radio broadcasts about how, when the Allies are coming, when they will be liberated. This soon will all be over. And then you turn it again. Our dear liberators, in quotes, come from basically come from the sky and target civilians. Now, There were cases of Allied warplanes targeting civilians in Italy in World War II, but it was not, this is implying it's a policy. And this card and this card, for example, as I said, are basically designed for the next war. They're trying to get people in Italy not to trust the Americans, not to trust the Allies, so that when the fascists can rise up, they will have a willing populace to work with against the occupation. It doesn't happen, but it's part of a very carefully crafted campaign to soil the nest, as it were.
So this is not a question, but a short telling. There was a book written about 10 years ago about a German couple who lost a son. It's based on a true story. They lost their son in the war. He was a German soldier and a fine young man. And they were so freaked out and so, just so broken from this. The father was a printer, and he started to print postcards about the foolishness of the war. And how, do you know the story? It's based on a true story.
I'm not sure I know the story specifically, but I've certainly heard stories like it.
You can Google the idea, but the short of it is, he started to print these postcards of his own propaganda against this war, and he would simply put them in a shirt and shake his hand on the street, and they'd fall out. And so people would find them, and of course he ended up getting reported and found.
Right.
But in the end, he fought this his own way.
So that's a form of propaganda, of underground propaganda, in a way, which is a piece we don't talk about in the collection much and don't talk about in the show, but is very important, and how postcards become personalized ways of delivering messages. And one of the interesting debates we had, my colleague in New York, who is Mr. Lauder's curator there, about postcards, is how people and whether people use them to use the messages to subvert the images on the front. There are a number of cases where we see quite ordinary images turn into what are basically political cards by the messages that are sent. One of the most striking that I've seen is a postcard of the can't speak for an hour and a half. Festspielhaus in Bayreuth, where the Wagner Festival happens. Just an ordinary tourist postcard that someone bought and sent with a message saying, "I have read your new book. I am with you. I love. I am with you in the movement." Sent to Hitler in Munich in 1924. So an ordinary tourist card becomes a political card. You can also do it in the other way, but we don't have a lot of evidence. We don't have a lot of. They just survive less. Yeah, ma'am.
You mentioned here was an image of. You said it was the only anti-Semitic card you were presented, and said you would get back to why. I think you weren't including more.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. This is the sort of stereotypical Jewish banker in very small form. The Nazi propaganda about Jews gets extremely present and grotesque. I mean, that's the missing piece in this whole thing. I debated a long time about what cards to include in the show. The book has a bit more, but and I may not have made the right call. I admit that freely. The anti-Semitic caricatures are so striking, so visceral, and so grotesque that I was afraid if I put them in the show, I would lose people's ability to think about the show. And I didn't want people to come away from the show saying, these caricatures, and not see the rest of it. In the same way, for example, there's a whole type of American postcard, real photo postcards, which are real photos, gelatin silver prints on cardstock. We're going to do a show of those in a couple of years. And one of the themes that runs on those is lynchings. People show up at lynchings and take photographs and put them on postcards and send to them. We have but one lynching card in the collection, and it was Mr. Lauder has not bought lynching cards on principle, but we do have one, and I also I would not include that in the show for exactly the same reason. It's just, it warps the experience. I might be wrong. I freely admit that. Maybe they should be there. But the show was also in a space that people were going to pass through. We had originally thought that the show would be in a place that would be where people would choose to go into it. And one of the concerns we had from the beginning was we're putting up an exhibition that's full of pictures of Hitler and swastikas and caricatures, and what are people going to think if they're just walking through the galleries and they look over and there's Hitler giving a speech? So we tried to design the show to make it a little bit more, to have a little bit more of a sense of a spatial occasion. And I think the designer, Kyle Hajishin, who's wonderful, really pulled that off brilliantly. But the caricature seemed one step too far for that, even that modified space. So I think we have time for one more. Or?
We have time for just one more
Okay.
question.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So I'm curious about the selection and the lack of emphasis on any of this political propaganda posters and postcards in the United States in the 20s and 30s, particularly the anti-union, anti-communist, state-sponsored popular culture,
Yeah.
particularly since it precedes so much of what happens in the 50s with the Red Scare.
Another good point. That's partly the balance of doing a show about propaganda in an art museum, and also working with the collection that we have and that Mr. Lauder assembled. He has that material. He has a lot of Union material from the 20s. Graphically, it often doesn't stand up. And that's where there's also a compromise made. The cards that we selected for the book and for the show are often the most visually striking ones. And so there's a visual cut that happens as well. It's again not a perfect solution, and that's one reason why in the show we were more moving towards questions of how types are created rather than specific stories. If you look in the book, there's a bit more about the union, about unions. There's a bit more about prohibition, and those cards are often historically interesting, but not that visually striking. Well, thank you all very, very much.